unlike anything you've ever seen before. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the Terminator.
Hey guys, I'm Brevin Thompson.
And I'm Cameron Simpson.
We are here to talk about The Terminator, written and directed by James Cameron, and this film is great for so many reasons. It spawned a huge franchise that I've grown to love since I was a kid. And in terms of James Cameron films, this was definitely like the film that helped him gain the recognition that he deserved as a filmmaker, because when you think of James Cameron, this is definitely one of the first few things that you think about in terms of his films, because his first directorial debut was Piranha 2, which a lot of us like to pretend didn't exist. But this I like to prefer to be his first film, because I like to pretend that Piranha 2 never existed. And when it comes to the original Terminator, it's definitely important to so many people. And in terms of Terminator films, I love the first film, though I personally prefer the sequel a whole lot more than the first film. Though there are moments of the first film that there's a lot about the first film that I really love, and we'll talk about that in this video. There's a lot to love. James Cameron's direction, how it looks, especially considering what the budget that he had for this film. It was about $6 million. And yeah, and the effects, given here and there, they still hold up. Given how although a little bit of the stop motion is a little bit dated. And of course, you have some fantastic performances. Mostly from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Biehn, and of course Linda Hamilton. And you got yourself an amazing sci-fi action horror film that still looks great even after almost 40 years.
I agree that the effects can sometimes be a little, as Brevin calls it, dated. But like I've said before in previous films, and I do not mean this as an insult, just as a reminder, that back then, especially, they didn't have all the tech that they have today to make something seem so realistic. So even though you have the highest budget in the world, if you don't have the tech necessary at the time to make it that type of realistic, then you just make do with what you got. But I am personally glad that they decided that it was good enough in terms of effects for that time period, and I'm really glad that it's still a classic to this day.
Yeah, because it wasn't the first in the franchise that I watched. It was mostly Terminator 2 that I watched, that was the one that I watched over and over, and I still like to watch it even to this day, and I never get bored of it. And the same goes for this one. I think out of all of the films, I think that mostly the first film is probably the most fast-paced.
For the Terminator franchise in particular, I'd agree. They were kind of going pretty fast because you have all these different types of chase scenes. You got a robot that won't stop until you're dead, and it's just going to keep coming after you over and over again, so you got to be on the run. There's just a lot of reasons for them to
Yeah, that's what I like about how they handle the Terminator in this movie, because he's basically metal Jason Voorhees, and he's actually legit kind of scary, and I kind of like about this version of in the first film. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, he knocked it out of the park, because that's kind of what helped make him such a huge star, right next to Conan the Barbarian, which he did before he did the Terminator. And of course in the 80s, he was huge with movies like Commando and of course Predator.
And a movie I actually came across, if I may, called, I think it was The Last Action Hero.
Last Action. Oh yeah, that was actually pretty decent in the 90s, and you had Total Recall and The Running Man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to.
Yeah, he's just really famous for a lot, and I do mean a lot, of different films, but one of the easily more recognizable ones is definitely The Terminator, and I honestly cannot think of a single film in that franchise, that is, where he didn't knock it out of the park, whether he was just standing there trying to kill somebody or even saying just one line really kind of...
Yeah, and he has like a limited amount of dialogue, surprisingly, in this film.
Yeah, but given the fact he's supposed to be portrayed as a cold, logical machine bent on destroying the world by saving Skynet from being destroyed by the Resistance, by killing the person that gave birth to their leader in the first place, I'd say there's not really much need for dialogue.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's supposed to be this emotionless killing machine that's, I mean, that has, like, one purpose, and that's to kill Sarah Connor, and, well, like you said, won't stop until she's dead.
Yeah, he even killed 2 other people and her roommates, thinking they were all her, and wouldn't stop until she was gone.
Yep, and that's kind of fucked up. But I like in the film's opening that we see, like, bits of the post-apocalyptic future in the year 2029 where the machines have, like, completely dominated the Earth and are doing their best to exterminate the rest of mankind. And when it comes to the opening titles and Brad Fiddel's score overall, I think that it's really good. And in terms of film scores, I think that Brad Fiddell is a very criminally underrated composer. And I've always adored his score for the first 2 films. And they're definitely they're definitely very recognizable in terms of movie scores. Though I personally prefer how he handles the score for the sequel. But nevertheless, I do love his score for the first Terminator.
Say that I definitely enjoyed the title card, although, admittedly, I think it might have been a little slower than ones I'm used to seeing in terms of, like, getting to the title. But the score itself, I think, is very, very interesting, and honestly, I'm surprised that guy didn't stay with the franchise for the entirety of it all, because he seemed to do a pretty good job for the first 2.
Shortly, like, after, like, working on these films, I mean, he's retired. I'm glad that, he's probably, like, enjoying what he's doing with his life, but still, with what he's given for this franchise for the first 2 films, kind of makes me feel a bit heartbroken. So after the opening titles, we get the arrival of the Terminator, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and what happens when he runs into a group of bikers asking for their clothes? I mean, one of them played by Bill Paxton, and it's always good to see Bill Paxton, maybe rest in peace. And he actually ends up, like, grabbing, like, one of them and actually he rips his fucking heart out. And I like that they present the Terminator in this film as this unstoppable force that will definitely fuck you up if you get in his way. Because, like I said, he is kind of scary in this movie.
Yeah, they definitely, like, established just how scary this guy can be. I mean, he, like, just really looks the part. And then at the moment that the Terminator arrives, pretty soon after that, if not instantly, we get Kyle Reese, who also arrived from the future, and as soon as he gets there, he steals a hobo's pants and basically, like, is chased by some cops because of it.
That son of a bitch took my pants!
Yeah.
I mean, he just appeared from an apocalyptic future, and then all of a sudden arriving in the 80s. So, yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's a lot to take in.
Definitely. And when it comes to Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese, I do like his performance in this film, and I honestly believe he is a criminally underrated actor, and I kind of felt sorry for how he didn't become a huge star after starring in this as well as Aliens, and I'm just like, come on, Hollywood, just get the guy something, just please, because have you not watched The Terminator or Aliens? When it comes to Michael Biehn, you might want to pull your heads out of your asses. Just saying.
As far as what my take would be on this guy being cast as Kyle Reese for the movie, I honestly don't know this guy's history as well as my friend here, of course, but I am surprised that Hollywood apparently, like, didn't really seem to want to give him too many more roles after this in Aliens, but at the same time, I think that he is one of the best embodiments of Kyle Reese to play even back then. I mean, there's just like a lot of different guys, and something about that guy when I first saw him just seemed like a good casting choice.
Definitely.
Now, as far as for the reason as to why why the Terminator and Kyle Reese are here in 1984, is because the Terminator was sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor,
while Kyle Reese was sent there to protect her. And when it comes to Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor in this film in particular, I like how she is handled in the film, because I mean, at first, I mean, she's this young woman who is mostly uncertain about her future until she runs into Kyle, and because of her encounters with the Terminator, she's kind of like forced to like become this strong character that, I mean, for me, I mean, she is a strong female character in this film, but in the sequel, she's a full-fledged badass, and that's really what I love about Sarah. But in terms of the first film, I mean, I do like Linda Hamilton in this role, and in terms of her and Michael Biehn's chemistry, I really like what they managed to do with these two characters, and their relationship, I buy it, and it makes sense in a way, but it creates a paradox in a way, but you understand what they were going for the Sarah and Kyle's love story.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little confusing at times, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but it really kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things, and it's just a little awkward, maybe, but to be fair, you know, they didn't exactly know about this sort of thing, but, you know, that's the thing about destiny. Sometimes it changes, sometimes it's predetermined, sometimes it's a predestination paradox. You never really know.
Yeah.
Now, the Terminator's here to kill Sarah Connor, and in order to do that, the first thing he does when he gets here is he steals some clothes from some people, and then he goes to a gun shop to buy weapons. Right after that, he goes to a payphone booth and looks up Sarah's name in the telephone book. He finds about 3 different Sarah Connors in the phone book and uses that to track them down. He kills the first 2 Sarah Connors with relative ease. And then goes after the last one, trying to stop, like, John Connor from being born early on.
Which we do find out a little bit more in that exposition scene where Kyle explains the future to Sarah. And the whole Tech Noir scene where starts off with this search for Sarah, with the Terminator searching for Sarah. I mean, Kyle's already there, and I really like this slow-mo moment, right when it looks like the Terminator is actually about to succeed in killing Sarah, and Kyle saves Sarah in just the nick of time. And after seeing a big muscular dude taking several shotgun blasts to the chest, I mean, that would be enough to suggest that motherfucker is not human and is in fact a cyborg. And I really like the shootouts in the scene and how it plays out. And of course, we get this memorable line.
Come with me if you want to live.
So after Kyle and Sarah manage to get away from the Terminator, we get the exposition scene. Well, first, right before it even starts, I like the monologue that Kyle says to Sarah about the Terminator, how it's out there, that it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity, remorse, or fear, and it will not stop ever until Sarah is dead. And that's just enough to... I mean, that delivery... It's just... that's just enough to convince her.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, it's just unbelievable how he's able to deliver that. I mean, it could send chills down someone's spine, I think, if you saw it in the movie theater back in the day.
Yeah, and when you have a nearly indestructible cyborg just out to kill you, that's just... That'd definitely be a lot to take on.
Especially since apparently Sarah, in her mind, was basically just nearly killed by one person and then kidnapped by another.
Well, it was for a good reason.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what she thought.
Yeah. And of course, like I mentioned, we get the exposition scene of Kyle explaining about the future, how Skynet will, how it's developed, it becomes self-aware, and launching, and how it launches a nuclear attack on mankind, begins to wipe out most of the human race. Then John Connor, Sarah's son, building up the resistance, and how it's on the verge of victory. And because of this, Skynet sent the Terminator back to 1984 to kill Sarah before John is even born. So if Sarah Connor dies, John Connor dies, that means the machines win the war.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to believe all that's riding on the success of one last mission. And even around that point, since it's like the 80s compared to what they're used to fighting the war in, weapons are a lot weaker, so beating it's a lot tougher. After another chase scene, the Terminator basically sustains some damage and decides to retreat to a rundown apartment of sorts to repair itself. Now, because it's a cybernetic organism with living tissue over the exoskeleton, it basically is able to, it has to open the skin on top of the exoskeleton up in order to make repairs. And the graphics for that, I honestly think, are very convincing, even for the 80s.
Yeah, I'm just like, this is almost as good as like some effects that you see today. And the makeup work and the animatronic work. The animatronic work is kind of like here and there, especially with the double for Arnold, like especially after like he removes his eye. I like the shot of where you see the robotic eye. So we get a brief interrogation with Kyle, the cops, and Dr. Silverman. I mean, he appears in like he appears later in the sequel, and of course, and a cameo in Terminator 3. But that's about it as far as his appearances go in this series. Kyle's being interrogated, and he of course discusses about the future and the Terminator and why he's after Sarah. And of course, none of them believe him. And of course, that's when the Terminator steps in and tries to get his way into the police station. And he gives another memorable line for this film.
I'll be back.
And he comes back. Boy, oh boy, does he come back. But as soon as he says that, he goes outside, takes a car, and drives it straight through the police station and comes out unfazed, then just starts killing everyone he sees trying to find Sarah.
Yeah, he goes on a fucking killing spree in this scene. I mean, mowing down multiple police officers just to get to Sarah.
Yeah, and Kyle Reese actually said that he would. He tried to tell him over and over again that he would come because that's what he does. He doesn't stop. He doesn't get hungry. He doesn't do anything. He just hunts. And he won't stop until she's dead. It's what he does. But they didn't listen. Thought he was crazy. Thought he was a loony.
But he came, and like I said, went on a fucking killing spree.
Yeah.
But, of course, Kyle and Sarah do get out of there. Kyle, in a way, professes his love for Sarah, and they have sex, and they conceive John Connor.
Yep. I believe that's called a predestination paradox, because we don't really know who John's dad was at the time, but then, he sends Kyle Reese back, and it's sort of like an infinite loop, so to speak. It was kind of interesting to me that he turned out to be his dad, but even around that point, I guess it kind of makes sense. He came all the way here to save her life, so why not?
And of course, we get another chase scene with Kyle and Sarah trying to get away from the Terminator. I really like the score in this scene, and it's definitely one of my favorites in the soundtrack. And how this chase ends with the Terminator in a tanker truck, and Kyle using his last pipe bomb to blow the truck up. That shot alone with the truck blowing up, holy shit. And given the budget that they had,
Yeah, that's quite realistic.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but not to burn the Terminator to a crisp. Well, mostly just burning off his
human tissue, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable. Brevin even told me before we started watching that James Cameron actually based that scene off of a nightmare he had.
Yeah, because I mean James Cameron's before he even came up with the concept of the Terminator, he envisioned. I mean, he had a nightmare about a robot emerging from the flames, and the second the Terminator like steps out of the wreckage and reveals his endoskeleton, that's just well, I guess James Cameron made his nightmare come true.
Quite revealing.
Yeah.
And the endoskeleton, how it looks pretty awesome. So the stop motion for the Terminator kind of looks a little bit dated. What would your take be on that?
Well, it's a little hard for me to describe, I think, sort of what my take could be on that, but the best thing I can think of is when it comes to stop motion movies, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of them because most of the time, movies like that, in my opinion, no offense to anyone who likes them, of course, but in my opinion, most stop motion movies, they tend to be like either a little ridiculous or kind of terrifying at the same time because the way those movies are made, they're like made with these dolls on a little set to capture movements with cameras, and it can just be a little freaky at times depending on the movie, or a little ridiculous depending on what you're going for. But in Terminator, it's like very vague, I guess you could say. Like there are vague moments where it looks realistic, vague moments where it doesn't. It's kind of like 50-50 here, but it's a little hard to really say whether it was good or bad. But it was definitely not, I think, what I was expecting.
Well, it was 1984 with this film being released around that time period, and they definitely didn't have the technology they used to like fully to make the animation look as good as I'm not saying that the stop motion animation was bad. It's just they could have done better, but the animatronics and the puppets used to what they used for the Terminator's endoskeleton, that I think works a whole lot better.
Yeah, I just think the main problem for me anyway, and maybe a few other people, I'm not entirely sure, but for me, it's just like, even though he's limping because he's damaged a little from the car crash, it's like when they try to make him move, it feels a little, I guess, what everyone would call dated, but for its time period, it also still does a nice job. I appreciate it.
And you gotta give Stan Winston some, props just for what he has managed to, bring this machine to life. And Stan Winston, may he rest in peace, because his work on Terminator 1 and 2, Aliens, and Jurassic Park, he was one of the best in the industry in terms of makeup and special effects. He was one of my personal favorites, and you will forever be missed.
Amen to that. After that, the Terminator basically chases Sarah and Kyle into a factory, and after they barricade the door before they start running again, Kyle has an idea to turn on a bunch of different machines in the factory that would make it so that would distract the Terminator so that they could not be tracked under all that machinery. And it works for at least about a few minutes, I'd say, before the Terminator shows up again, and Kyle dies trying to protect Sarah from it, but not before he uses his last pipe bomb to pretty much blow that thing to smithereens and basically cut it in half.
We're led to believe that the Terminator has finally been destroyed, but we get one final short chase where it's crawling towards Sarah, and then she leads the Terminator to a hydraulic press, and then that's when she pushes the button and then crushes it. And just damn, That, I mean, after all it took to try to destroy that thing, I mean, all that was left for the final blow was crushing it with a hydraulic press.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, all right, Sarah, you are officially a badass. So then after that, we cut to what looks like a few months later, and we see that Sarah is visibly pregnant with John. So she goes to a gas station, and some kid takes a picture of her, which is the same picture that Kyle has of her from the future. And then she rides off towards a storm, and then that's the Terminator. It's easily one of the best sci-fi films from the 80s, and I definitely don't have like much problems with this film. I mean, outside of like a few effects just being dated here and there, but in terms of its story, its characters, James Cameron's direction and writing, it's a movie that's, I mean, it's definitely so 1980s, but because of that, it works, and it's definitely one movie that I would definitely happily watch over and over, and as well as the sequel, because when it comes to the sequel, Terminator 2, it's definitely one of my all-time favorite films, but I still have a lot of respect for the original Terminator.
And I also very much enjoy this film. I still think about it a lot to this day, and I don't mean to come across so negative in this review. I guess when it comes to movies from the 80s, you know, it was a good year for movies and we all enjoyed them, but when it comes to talking about them, movies like that tend to like just speak for themselves. It's a little hard to describe, I guess, but even still, I very much enjoyed this movie when I got around to it, and I do think that it's earned all the praise that it's gotten in its respective franchise for years.
So I'm going to give the Terminator an A. Cameron, thank you so much for joining me for these videos, and it's definitely a lot of fun to have you here. Yeah. And guys, thank you so much as always for watching. Looking forward to doing more videos really soon. And if you want my thoughts on old or new films, of course, you know where to find me.